Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Chat Show, where we talk about empathy, employment, and innovation every Wednesday at 2 Eastern with the experts from the staffing industry, from the disability community. And today's guest is very special. Um, Today, everybody is stressed out about their job productivity as well as family well being. The mental stress has become our second nature. Luckily for us, today's guest is passionate about the mental health issues in the modern workplace and will be sharing her views on mental health at the workplace and few other amazing, interesting topics. She's, uh, she's an executive director at Harvard Business School. She and her team are supporting faculty at Harvard Business School with case writing. One of the common thing which I proudly say that I have been working with Rangam for 25 years and she's with Harvard Business School for 25 years. And also one another common thing is we share the same birth month. So
Yes.
uh, so with that, welcome Carin, welcome to the show.
Nish, it's so great to be here. Thank you for having me. And Tiffany, thank you for being with us also and communicating the message. So yes, 25 years. I guess it's a common anniversary. I think 25 more years at HBS would be great. So 25
There you go.
world needs you. So that would
Absolutely.
be great. Great to be here. And I guess before we get started, I have something for you since it is today actually your actual birthday. So I have a real candle. We'll sure have to blow up.
Oh,
And I hope that everybody joins around the world to wish you a very happy birthday.
so nice of you.
Look forward to it's the pandemic. So
Thank you
very
so
happy
much.
birthday to you.
Thank you so much. And
You're very
that was
welcome.
amazing. That's so sweet of you, and
Of
really
course.
appreciate that surprise. That's my first candle of the day. So I have not celebrated my birthday.
You'll
Family
you'll
has
have
not. So you are the first one. So thank you.
many more to come, and the one you'll blow out will be the really special one. So
Thank you so much.
thank you for having me, Nish. It's a pleasure.
Same here. So can see if you can share, if I try to give the background to the viewers about you and your amazing work at Harvard Business School, I won't be able to do the justice. So please share a little bit about you and your work with our viewers.
Sure. So I support HBS faculty writing cases. Case studies are stories about companies and decision makers around the world. It's a very wonderful job because we get to learn a lot about very different situations. You get to talk to people. You're not a consultant, so you're really just a partner trying to discover what they're wrestling with. And it's the kind of job that takes you around the world with very wonderful people such as the HBS faculty. So it's a great job. In it, you learn a lot about many topics, about many things, which makes it nice to see patterns. And then a few years ago, we're going around the world and noticed after 2008 a real concentration around cost cutting. And then the puzzle was, why are we seeing so much interest in cost cutting when there seems to be so much companies could be doing to promote more inclusive work environments and also promote mental health at work to reduce, presenteeism or absenteeism, and so became personally very interested in that space. So, yeah,
No, this is great, and around the world is the key here. I'm pretty sure your vast experience working with and understanding and writing on the businesses from all over the world. But more importantly, your journey, your personal journey, starting from France to Germany to United States for last 25 years. With that experience, I have heard you saying that you never really fit in because you are half French and half German, growing up all over the world, and now working in United States. So does not fitting in help you in any way to understand the diverse culture around the world more obviously or objectively?
I think so. And in a way, one of the beautiful things is that I think we are becoming more multicultural and more mixed. And I think this will enable us to sort of realize that there's no one way to do things, that norms and values may differ around the world. And that if you seek to understand why people are behaving a certain way, then you can seek, commonalities with them rather than differences. So, yes, so I'm half French, half German. I was born in Mexico. And, when I was in Germany, I was too French. When I was in France, I was too German. And so I got to appreciate, people who are trying to fit in, people whose background may be different from ours. And I think this has brought some interest in the space of diversity and inclusion. And I think, people like you and most of the people that I've met on this journey have a personal reason for engaging in this work. It's also very nice to be mixed because you get to have be exposed to very different thoughts and perspectives, which is really what I think we're all after in this conversation.
And how would you relate empathy to that? Like your experience and background, truly global background.
So I personally think it's very difficult to put myself in anyone else's shoes because everybody is so absolutely unique. But I think I derive my empathy from understanding that maybe being in someone else's shoes might feel very different from my own shoes. And so that I should give this person a chance to explain how they are or how they're behaving, and also understand that collectively their lived experience might be shaping their behavior.
Yeah, and by the way, thank you for taking and wearing our empathy T-shirt. We appreciate
with pride.
And let me tell you, I learned a new word for this T-shirt, empathy T-shirt, and that's uniform. You post yesterday something on LinkedIn that I'm ready with the uniform. I love it. I'm going to start calling this my uniform. And this is really.
You've built an empathy and equity army, Nish.
There we go. Yeah. So that is the uniform. So we thank you for that new word in our marketing dictionary. So we will be talking.
But it's I think it's a great message, because if you think of equity, you really cannot have, equity is not equality. Equity is very different, and you cannot have it without a real empathy, or at least start to begin the understanding of what the person that you're trying to help might have been experiencing. So I love it.
Yeah, those are great. So I think, why don't you share some of your thoughts on equity and your background and knowledge on neurodiversity. I know you are passionate about neurodiversity. So how neurodiversity at workplace is connected to empathy? Some of your thoughts and equity. If you can share that, would be great.
So in order for to behave in a way that drives equity, you need to go beyond the one size fits all, and recruit differently, onboard differently, and that is really difficult. And actually, I was listening to one of my colleagues this morning, Ranjay Gulati, who's an expert on leadership and resilience, and he pointed out that companies fail because of competency traps, and we all fall into them, which is, what is it that we do well? So we are from a certain set of schools, asking a certain set of questions, looking for a certain set of criteria, and then we onboard everybody and we expect it to work. The problem with competency traps is that, they're usually built on habits. You tend to sort of play defense, so you're going to be focused on minimizing risks rather than really driving innovation. And then very strong bias for habits, which is what works for us, and as humans we do the same. So when you think of companies, if you really want to drive equity, you have to start looking at these competency traps that you set up for yourself, and think about, how do you recruit? So this is working with partners like you who can actually educate the company on how they will have to change, educate managers who will then drive the culture that will then make it possible for neurodiverse individuals to integrate. And I think this relates to empathy, because if you do it in one space of the company, then you develop these muscles of saying, okay, why have we always done things a certain way? There are advantages to doing things a certain way, but there are also disadvantages and costs. advantages to doing things a certain way at a certain point in time, but then the world changes and we keep on doing things a certain way. I think one of the great things of the pandemic, for all its absolute horror, is that for many, processes, it's been the end of the world as we know it. And kinds of conversation that you're driving with people in the staffing industry to rethink work, I think is a great opportunity and maybe one of the silver linings out of this pandemic.
I 100% agree with you. And we have seen that shift and rapid shift in mindset, and also thought, the leadership is taking the initiatives and really acting on it. We have experienced that during this pandemic, during this period.
Yes.
So talking about right hires and hiring right people, we hear this a lot when we are working with companies, that what is in for me. When we go out and talk about implementing these programs to promote diversity at work, how can companies sustain their neurodiversity program and make business case out of them versus hiring only handful of people on the spectrum? Because as you know, and this is a very common question, then hiring managers will say, okay, what if I fail? And if I hire somebody on the spectrum, what if I don't meet my SLA or my KPIs? What are the consequences? And this is a real practical challenge we are facing. What are your thoughts? How do you manage this
Absolutely.
situation?
So I think in terms of risk taking, I was thinking back on like SAP and Microsoft. I mean, certainly not small companies. They were, they've been doing this for nearly a decade, or I guess SAP was 2013. So, while back. So we have a track record. We have a track record of big companies doing it. You could argue that big companies have more cushion to absorb, additional accommodations. So for small businesses, I think, an education around what it takes, but also the promises. So I think your question is driving a little bit too much to risk in my mind, whereas when I think of all the opportunities that companies aren't taking. So if you think of the skills that some neurodiverse individuals exhibit, especially those who may be on the spectrum, they're extremely valuable today. So people who are able to focus and to get things done in this world where there's so much distraction, turnover rates are much lower among individuals who are diagnosed on the spectrum. Their ability to, sort of work on highly technical tasks, which are also much more important these days. So I think if we focus too much on the risk and mitigating them, you really miss the opportunity of hiring teams and augmenting your teams with individuals that bring a very different perspective. And then maybe having somebody who has a different perspective and a different approach to work could also make the rest of the team better. Yeah. If there's a culture that enables people to make the most out of differences.
Yeah, and that is so true, that risk and that risk-taking capabilities or abilities with individual or sometimes with hiring managers and hiring teams is so important, because that not having that awareness is causing that sometimes misunderstanding. And so that awareness is very, very important. So talking about the awareness in the society, in the corporate world, as a leader from the higher education sector, do you think that for long-term positive changes to happen, we as a society need to incorporate equity and diversity related education and awareness in our education system? And how do you see that evolving?
So I can speak, I think most for the US in that department. I mean, what I see in schools is that there has been a real push to educating children about differences, about how you manage, how you treat people like persons. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody wants to be treated as an individual. The connection that I see is missing is, kids get trained in schools, but then they get out into the workforce, and then somehow we forget what we have learned in schools about not bullying those who may be different, or we do not set up the mechanisms to sort of protect that. So I think the early education system works. I think somewhere in the transition to the workplace gets lost. I was thinking back to your earlier question or an earlier part of our conversation around just awareness of difference. I think we're also in this conversation assuming a little bit too much that the neurodiverse are different, as if we weren't. So I have a particular behavior at work. I have a particular way that people work with me that makes it easier. And I think when you work with neurodiverse, they come and say, when you do this, this happens to me, educates me to do the same with people who are working with me. And so you can also drive awareness one person at a time. And if, people were better at saying, this is how I work better, and managers were better at understanding that none of us are uniform, I think you can build a better workplace. And this relates also, I think, to mental wellness.
Well, that's for sure.
We have the education early in school, and I think we could learn from the schools. In some ways, I think they're ahead of us.
Yes. So one of the things which, as we have partnered with Dr. Fung at Stanford University. And one of the recent initiatives I have learned from Dr. Fung that, there are some programs and classes they are offering to MBA students and business. So they are interested because I think that nurturing and that putting those seeds when we are in getting into this higher education system, I think that might also help because leaders, they are interested in learning about this. So if we start early, that's just a thought. Any thoughts on that, how that can help future leaders?
I think that's phenomenal. But, you and I attended the seminar on neurodiversity at Stanford, and they've done awesome job, and also with their job banks and their candidate pool. So I think a real concerted effort is great. And every little bit starts. Now you're seeing, in higher ed classes around anti-racism and understanding racism. And I think it would be good to have, a module also on understanding neurodiversity and how you drive that way. So it's coming, but it's an excellent idea. To anybody listening out there, I think it's a great idea to build that bridge. And then there you can build organizations that actually make things possible.
Right. And that organization is, that's where those customized processes and best practices get implemented, as you earlier mentioned, SAP and JP Morgan Chase. Some of those leaders, they have these amazing pilot programs and very successful, and a lot of learning. How do we adopt that and customize those best practices at workplace? Combination of that, because what I believe that every one of us is connected to someone on the spectrum or someone with disability. So we all have good intentions, to help them with the meaningful job. It's just a lot of times we don't know where to start and how to implement those. So if we educate those leaders, future leaders, and implement those best practices at work, I think that can be win-win for everyone.
Yeah, and there's a war on talent, and it's an untapped talent. Many are overqualified for the jobs that they have. The other big hope, I think, is just the new generation. You and I have also talked about how much, we're big fans of millennials, big fans of, very young adults who do understand that humans are different and have a very different view of the world than my generation certainly did. So we celebrated our 25 years, Nish, where the people half of our age can make double the difference that you and I can.
Yeah. Absolutely. So talking about, we always, so far, as in this ecosystem, people on the spectrum and people with disability, we always talk about it. It's more about what people with autism can do for companies than about what companies can do for people on the spectrum. What are your thoughts?
So I would say that I wouldn't distinguish there between necessarily, individuals who are on the spectrum versus somebody who may be suffering from severe ADHD or depression. So, there's a form of accommodation. The first step is communication, I think, is understanding. And that probably also starts in recruiting, which is, can you build a rapport with the person that you're interviewing that makes it possible for the person to communicate with you what will enable them to succeed in the job. So I think a lot of recruiting is very focused on credentials, and then set up, even interviews are very focused on interpersonal skills, when a lot of jobs actually are not depending on interpersonal skills. So the whole structure puts a category of individuals or persons who might have anxiety in situations where it's extremely difficult for them just to communicate about who they are behind the credentials that they might bring. So companies and managers maybe can take a little bit more reflection or risk around how they use the discovery process. Let's not call it interviewing process, even though that's what it's called now, the discovery process. So the way I tend to do it when I interview is that I'm very open about my own disposition. And that once you have somebody sort of share, the person may be more willing to come back and say, well, actually, this is how, these are my tendencies. I may be a little bit obsessive, and then you can organize yourself. So I think companies can start there, and then the rest is a lot of what we've already talked about in terms of creating teams, putting teams together in a good way, and really educating people to not want diversity just for the brochure version of diversity, but for the difference in thoughts. When you have different thoughts and perspectives, is that things take a little bit longer. And as you said, we're all in a business imperative. So really harnessing the power of difference to make it worth the time and investment. And I think companies are getting there, and companies understand that through the friction of difference, you can really get innovation, and everything's going to be reinvented now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would like to change gears a little bit and touch we touched that topic a little bit, but what would you advise? This is about the mental wellness during this time. It has been challenging for everyone. So what would be your your advice to business leaders for managing mental wellness of themselves, of course, first, and then their employees and their team? Please share your thoughts. We would love to learn from you.
So I think it's extremely difficult. The one positive side of the pandemic, which has really come with an attendant mental health disorder pandemic, when you see, all of the sort of things that we track are really in the red. So this, depression has tripled, suicidal ideation, overdose are over 30%. One of the big challenges in the past to talking about mental health as work was stigma. And it was a lack of education. I think what COVID has done is really stripped the veil of stigma. And now we realize that with half of us reporting that our mental health has decreased since the beginning of COVID, I think companies and individuals are in a place of actually talking about it. And once you start to talk about it, it's the beginning of a potential intervention. It's the beginning of changing one's behavior. It's the beginning of changing how teams work. It's the beginning of changing how incentive systems may work. It's the beginning of also changing what kind of support you provide to employees. So a couple of things, if you're a leader, first, do take care of yourself. And I know it's easy, and we're all hearing it, and it's really frustrating to hear it because we all know that it's very, very challenging. Reflect on how you behave towards these issues, and some of it is shaped by the past. In terms of also, go ask HR what are how are the plans. Often companies do not provide enough support for people who might needing therapy, so it's much longer than they think usually. It's not just about providing another app. It's really about encouraging people to take the time to heal. And then I think all of us as citizens also can lobby our elected officials. So for the first time in history, we have an incoming president who, really an absolute role model in terms of how you recover from loss and grief. And he has declared that mental health is health. And I think the new administration has the chance to make mental health as a foundation for recovery. So lobby your elected officials and make sure that the incoming administration, keeps its promises to reduce stigma and lower barriers to access, especially for those of us who have suffered the most in this pandemic, which are, essential workers and and folks in marginalized communities. So we can all do our part.
Yeah, no, that is so amazing. I was just thinking on that line that how that is needed more than ever. Also talking about the global with your global experience and the different culture. How mental health and mental wellness in the workplace is managed with different cultures. Have you seen, or what are your observations with different cultures?
Oh yeah, so that's a super important question, because I think, especially with interventions, people tend to think if you're in global companies that you can sort of have a blanket policy. So pathologies diverge by countries. There are some mental illnesses in Japan that don't exist here, and we have some things in the DSM that don't exist in different parts of the world. Stigma and discussability is very different. In the US, in some ways, we're ahead. Versus in still some parts of Asia. There's some countries around the world where, if you exhibit mental health disorders, then, your life might be at risk. So there are very many differences in terms of stigma pathologies. And then the healthcare systems are also very different. So, for example, in Europe, where people might be able to get more accommodation or support to the public health system, in the US, companies will have to step in the gap a little bit more in order to make sure that people are protected. So very different from very different parts of the world, which is also great because you get to learn from different approaches.
Yeah, and how do we adopt some of those approaches? And so it is more like a toolkit. If it's a global company. So how do they manage some of the global companies you have seen? How do they manage this different? Maybe they have different policies, or how do they manage this?
Yeah, so I think what comes centrally is the culture. So what's going to drive what people do locally is the messages that the corporation is sending centrally, and it is the nature of the incentives that it provides to the local subsidiaries in terms of what is it tracking. So it might be tracking turnover, it might be tracking mental health leaves. So I think the center can send a strong message about what are the dimensions that we're maximizing. Let's say we're dedicated to maximizing the well-being of our people. You take a company like Johnson & Johnson, where it's actually an explicit mission, and then you let the subsidiaries deal locally as they would with product market issues.
Interesting. I wish there was more time for us to continue this conversation.
Well, you'll have another birthday, Nish. We'll gather again in a year.
There we go. That's the plan. But before we close today's session, please share any story. Tell us a brief story that you might have come across that you think is relevant to this conversation. Anything you can think of.
Ooh, that's difficult. Any story? Not really, Nish. I'm not. I'm a storyteller at work.
How about any?
I don't know. Maybe just a difference. A difference that a person makes.
How about some case? I know in earlier conversation you mentioned something about the massage place. Maybe that very unique situation, combination of automation and human touch, and how do we keep that balance? Maybe that.
So that story is just about how the tension to managing humans. So I was talking to somebody who is running a service operation, so it's facials, and he said he had gone through the 2006 depression, and he had to let go 50 out of his 55 staff or whatever, and he said it was such a heartache, it nearly killed him, and he decided that he would never do that again. And so he's rebuilding his business in a completely different way, which is he's taking out a lot of the back office and automating this and leaving this few staff that he has to interact with clients in a very different level, so at a deeper level, not just a transactional level. And so this was his solution to the upheaval. So back to the beginning of the conversation, we have lots of stories to tell about very random things things that work. But I think my one human story is that everyone's actions make a huge difference. And so, somebody connected me to you, and it's changed the way that I see the world. And so, if you can do one thing today, reach out to a couple of people that you think might be having a hard time in this time, and help them, and remind them that we'll get through this, and there's some things that are going to get better. So
thank you.
Sorry, Nish, I'm sorry.
No,
I disappointed you.
This is so powerful, and I will take your advice on this. This is so humanly, right? This is so powerful that if we all do that, one or two connections, one or two, pick up the phone and ask somebody, how are you doing? I think that is what is really needed. So thank you for sharing and that advice. I really appreciate it. I know all our viewers are appreciating all your advice and your leadership and your amazing work in this space. So we thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Wishing you, your family, happy holidays. Stay safe and healthy, and wishing you all the best.
Yes, thank you so much, Tiffany. Thank you so much for your work for us and everything. And bye, everybody. Take care of yourselves and others. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time. Take care.
Ooh, happy birthday!
Hey. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. Bye bye.